Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Lioness for Truth, where one video at a time I bring forth hidden historical documents and ancient artifacts to restore the stolen yet rich history of the not-so-African African-American. Today's video is hopefully going to be short. I'm going to be going over this book that was released in 1733 called Memoirs of the Secret Service of John Mackey during the reigns of King William, Queen Anne, and King George I. Now, John Mackey was an English spy who was sent north into Scotland by King George to spy on the Jacobites. The Jacobites, or the Stuart line of Jacobites, was the ruling family in Scotland. And there was a war going on between England and Scotland, or between the rulership in England and the Jacobites at this time in history, called the Jacobite Rebellion. And so John Mackey was sent by England into Scotland to spy on the Jacobites. And he wrote detailed accounts about the people that he saw, about these Jacobites, about these Stuarts and these royals, and reported back to the King of England. So we're going to read his descriptions of these Jacobites, of these royals that he saw in Scotland in the 1700s. And we're going to debunk some myths here, because they want you to think, as the so-called African American, as Black people, they want you to think that our history started in 1865, that our history started with slavery, or that, we were pulled out of the jungles of Africa in the 1600s and brought to America, and that's when our history began. But that is false. Even the narrative of slavery isn't taught correctly. Our history did not start with slavery. Our history did not start in 1865. And we're going to see how John Mackey in the 1700s described these Scottish Jacobite royals, these kings, queens, princes, princesses, dukes, duchesses, as being Black people. So this man was hired by the king. So he had a very important position. Accuracy was of utmost importance when it came to the job that he was doing. I mean, he was reporting to the king. So this man was getting details clear and accurate about the people that he was seeing. So let's see how John Mackey in the 1700s described the Scottish royals and nobles as being Black people. We're going to debunk some lies, like I said, about the so-called African Americans' history having started with slavery, when in reality we did not come from Africa. A large majority of so-called African Americans actually descend from these Jacobites, who, after they lost the war with England, were deported from Scotland. And that's why over 70% of so-called African Americans today have Scottish surnames. Those are not a slave master's surnames. Those are our surnames that we came over from Scotland with in the 1700s. But let's get reading. So here we're in this book, we're on page 40, and we're going to see how John Mackey, this English spy, described Charles, Duke of St. Albans, and Charles Fitzroy, Duke of Grafton. So we're talking about two dukes here. They are nobles in Scotland in the 1700s. Because like I said, as a so-called African American, they want you to think that your history started 200 years ago when the white man pulled you out of the jungles of Africa, when in reality, that narrative is entirely false and not evidence-based at all. We have nothing to do with Africa, nor did we come from Africa, nor do we descend from Africans. So we're going to see how John Mackey described these two dukes here. Charles, Duke of St. Albans. He is of a Black complexion, not too tall as the Duke of Northumberland, and yet very like King Charles, turned of 30 years old. So he is of Black complexion. Charles, Duke of St. Albans, is a Black complexion man. And another thing interesting that it says is, yet very like King Charles. So it says that this duke in 1700s is of Black complexion, similar to that of the king, of King Charles. So we're dealing with two Black men here. The king is of Black complexion, a Black man, and so is his son. Because as we can see above, it says King Charles, Duke of St. Albans, is son to King Charles II. So his father, the king, King Charles, is a Black complexion Black man, as is he, as his son, of Black complexion. And he's a duke in Scotland in the 1700s. So what is a Black man doing on the throne of Scotland in the 1700s if African Americans, as we're falsely called, were swinging around on vines in the African jungle until 200 years ago, when the white man came and got us and brought us to plantations in the American South? What is this Black man, King Charles, doing on the throne of Scotland, if that narrative is true? Not only is he a Black man, but his son is also of Black complexion. These are Black men we're talking about. These are the ancestors of the people now falsely called African American. Now down below we have Charles Fitzroy, Duke of Grafton. Let's see how he was described. A tall Black man, about 25 years old. Now remember, John Mackey's job that he was appointed by the King of England was to go north and spy on these Scottish nobles and report back what he saw. Would accuracy not be of utmost importance to this man who literally was hired by the king? It could mean losing his head if he did not report back accurately. And he just said that Charles Fitzroy, Duke of Grafton, is a tall black man about 25 years old. Now let me ask you this. Why would they call a white man a black man? Why would they describe a white man as a black man? Is a white man called a black man today, or is a black man called a black man today? Charles Fitzroy, Duke of Grafton, is a tall black man. That's self-explanatory. Those are simple terms. He was described as a tall black man. This is a black man. They want you to think that Europe was this white continent, this all-white continent, and we were in the jungles of Africa, of the Ivory Coast till 200 years ago. False narrative. Not factual at all. Charles Fitzroy, Duke of Grafton, is a tall black man, and he was described as a tall black man by someone who would lose his head most likely if he did not report accurately to people that he was spying on, to the king that hired him. So we have 3 black men described just on this one page. King Charles himself, his son, and also another man named Charles Fitzroy, Duke of Grafton, a tall black man about 25 years old. These are the people that so-called African Americans descend from. We are in no way African. Here on page 137, let's see how John, Archbishop of York, is described. Another thing I'd like to add is notice that these people aren't servants. Okay, they're not washing clothes, they're not making beds, they're not running baths, they're not feeding cattle. These are the nobles. These are the dukes and the kings and the princes and the archbishops of Scotland at this time. These aren't servants. These are nobles and royals that are in positions of power, and they are black people. So John, Archbishop of York, is described as follows. He is one of the greatest ornaments of the Church of England, a black man and 55 years old. A black man. When in history have you ever heard a white man called a black man? John, Archbishop of York, is a black man, 55 years old. Archbishop, that's a really high position to have. Of where? Of England. We're not talking about Africa. We're not talking about Africans. He's the Archbishop of York, and he is a 55-year-old black man. These are the ancestors of the so-called African American, not Africans. And as we can see above, he was made Archbishop of York by King William himself. A black man, 55 years old, was appointed Archbishop of York by King William himself. See, these are the books that they hid deliberately so that they could brainwash us with this false out-of-Africa slave narrative in the public school system. They hid these books first and then came with their narrative that is not fact-based at all. Because notice how when they've been telling us how we descend from African slaves our whole life, they never pulled any sources or books or proof to prove that fact. Like we can pull sources and books and proof to prove that we do not descend from African slaves. Notice they never pull any sort of books like this to prove the African slave narrative. They just talk and repeat. Repetition is the basis of hypnosis, and we have been hypnotized with a false African slave narrative when in reality we descend from the swarthy, dark-skinned, black indigenous Europeans. Like John, Archbishop of York, who was a 55-year-old black man that was appointed to Archbishop of York by King William himself. Let's read over a few more before I wrap this video up. Duke of Somerset. Okay, we're dealing with another duke. He's not a servant. He's not a slave. He is the Duke of Somerset, England. Is of a middle stature, well-shaped, and a very black complexion. Have you ever heard a white man described as having a very black complexion? A lover of music and poetry, of good judgment, but by reason of great hesitation in his speech, wants expression. He is about 42 years old. A 42-year-old man of a very black complexion. And he is the Duke of Somerset. Not the slave of Somerset. He's the Duke. So let's get the definition of Duke real fast to really sort of add more detail to this. So Duke, in Great Britain, one of the highest order of nobility, a title of honor or nobility next below the princes, as the Duke of Bedford or of Cornwall. Again, in Great Britain, one of the highest orders of nobility. That's what being a duke means. And he is a very black, very dark-skinned, very melanated 42-year-old man, the Duke of Somerset. Have we gone over yet one person that was described as being white or Caucasian? So far, all of these nobles have been described as black because the narrative that is taught in school, the false narrative that is taught in the public school system, in reality, it's the exact opposite. When they said that everybody was white, everybody was really black. So let's read the Earl of Nottingham. He has the exterior air of business and application enough to make him very capable. In his habit and manners, very formal. A tall, thin, very black man, like a Spaniard or Jew. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. The Earl of Nottingham, a tall, thin, very black man, like a Spaniard or a Jew. A tall, thin, very black man, like a Spaniard or a Jew. This is the Earl of Nottingham, a very black man. A tall, thin, very black man is the Earl of Nottingham. We're talking about Scotland, not talking about Africa. Like a Spaniard or a Jew, which means the Spaniards at this time in history, the people of Spain, are also swarthy, are also dark-skinned, or what would be now called black people. Because he's very black, like a Spaniard or a Jew, or a Jew. So at this point in history, it was still known that the Jews are so-called black people, or are Negroes, are Negroid. Because it said he is a very black man, like a Spaniard or a Jew. So, like I said, in this point in history, it was still known that the Jews are black. Because he saw this very swarthy, dark-skinned black man and said, he kind of looks like a Spaniard or a Jew. But if you believe the lie that the people today are the Jews, you wouldn't say such a thing. That's how known it was that the Jews are a black, dark-skinned, Negroid people. Now let's pull another definition. Let's get the definition of Earl. A British title of nobility or a nobleman, the third in rank, being next below a marquis and next above a viscount. So another very high-ranking noble title this black man has in the 1700s in Scotland. A British title of nobility or a nobleman, the third in rank being next below a marquis and next above a viscount. That is the title of the Earl of Nottingham, this tall, thin, very black man that looks like a Spaniard or a Jew. Now let's go over to Duke of Richmond. He is a gentleman, good-natured to a fault, very well-bred and has many valuable things in him, is an enemy to business, very credulous, well-shaped, black complexion, much like King Charles, not 30 years old. So here again we have another reference to King Charles being a black man. And the Duke of Richmond is described as having a black complexion. Now, before I read this last description of the Duke of Northumberland, let's pull the definition of complexion, because what white people want you to think is that complexion means hair color, because they want to bend the definitions of words all of a sudden to try to keep this history hidden. But complexion does not mean hair color. Complexion describes the color of one's skin. So let's pull that definition. Complexion: the color of the skin, particularly of the face, the color of the external parts of the body or thing, as a fair complexion, a dark complexion, or the complexion of the sky. So complexion, according to the English dictionary, is describing the color of one's skin. Your skin, your skin, your skin, not your hair. So when it's saying that these men have a black complexion, it's saying that they have a black skin color, that they have a black face, that the color of their skin is black, not their hair. So let's go ahead and debunk that lie, because they're immediately going to come with that excuse. Complexion means the color of your skin, particularly of your face. So when it says these men have a black complexion, it's not talking about, oh, he was a white boy with black hair, which in and of itself is genetically impossible to happen anyway. So complexion means the color of the skin, particularly of the face. Now let's read over this last description before I wrap this video up. I don't want it to be too long, but let's read about the Duke of Northumberland. He's a man of honor, nice in paying his debts, and living well with his neighbors in the country. Does not much care for the conversation of men of quality or business. Is a tall, black man, like his father the king, about 40 years old. He was a most worthy person, very good-natured, and had a very good sense. All these are black men. Every single description we've read, black men. Some descriptions he writes black complexion, even though we went over what complexion means. It means color of the face, color of the skin. But some of these descriptions, he keeps it super simple and super self-explanatory by just describing them as black men. I mean, it doesn't get any more self-explanatory and easy to understand than that. The Duke of Northumberland is a tall black man. Period. Is a tall black man like his father the king. So we've read over 2 or 3 or 4 examples now saying that King Charles of Scotland, King Charles Stuart, was a black man. The King of Scotland was a black man. The Duke of Northumberland is a 40-year-old tall black man. They want us to think that we came out of the jungles of Africa when in reality we were on the throne in Scotland and ruling over all these European countries until 250 years ago. That's where we came from, not from Africa. Our ancestors came off of the throne of Scotland and all these other European countries to plantations. This is our real history. This is our real origin, and they know it. They know it. Of course, you know the history of the people whose history you stole.
Do white people pay so much attention to black people if they don't like them? You would think if you didn't like something, why would you be paying attention to it? I don't pay attention to things I don't like.
What's the answer?
The answer is the liar knows what lie he told. You see what I'm saying? So even if I made it deceitful and I made you think that the answer's over here, but the answer is really over here, I'm still gonna be looking over here. Me, the one that tricked, because I know this is the right answer. Black people have lost their identity, but our oppressors have not lost our identity. That's just why they chopped those noses off of the Pharaoh and the Sphinx in Egypt in the first place, is because without this nose, we can tell you this is whoever it is. But with that nigga nose, it can only be niggas. Why would somebody vandalize a whole face and only vandalize one part? Nobody wanted to knock an eye off or take an ear off or no chins missing. No, just the nose.
Because now the Caucasian claims that this was him. And every single description we just read was of a black man. The dukes and earls and bishops and archbishops and kings and princes of all of these European countries, and as we read over today, of Scotland specifically, black men. You can't argue with facts. White supremacy is based off of fantasy, not facts, and it's based off of fiction, not history. You will never see a white supremacist pull historical proof to prove that he was the Vikings, or the King of England, or the King of France, or the King of Scotland, or any of the things that they claim to be. Have you ever seen them pull proof to prove what they're saying to be true? They don't. Because the proof is in all these old books, and in all these old books, those people are described as being black, which is why their whole white supremacist narrative is built off of talk and only talk, not evidence. Because according to the evidence, the nobility of Europe were black people.